Welcome to Nation Golden Bachelor News, the island of peace in a sea of drama. In the days that followed, Cindy became an island. The rumor mill churned around her. Whispers about Mel's ex, her name was leaked, Elena, her profession, a landscape architect, even old photos swirled through the mansion like a toxic mist. Other contestants, smelling blood in the water, saw an opportunity. Some offered her brittle, gossip-laden sympathy, hoping to bond over shared scorn. Others subtly angled to position themselves as the more stable, drama-free alternative for Mel. Cindy accepted none of it. She politely declined to engage in speculation. "That's Mel's story," she would say, with a small, closed-lipped smile. "I'm focused on my own." She took long, solitary walks, not as a tragic figure, but as a tourist in her own newfound peace. She began to journal, filling pages with not just her pain, but observations of the beauty around her, the geometry of the vines, the specific blue of the California sky, the way the light hit a particular stone fountain. She was, consciously, retraining her focus from the internal drama of a man to the external reality of a world that was still stunningly beautiful. It was in this state of quiet self-possession that Jordan found her. Their first real conversation wasn't by design. She was sitting on a stone bench, sketching the gnarled trunk of an old oak tree in her journal. He paused on his own walk. "That's good." His voice was a low, calm rumble. He was a man in his early 60s, with the quiet bearing of a former professor or a master carpenter, someone used to observing details. Startled, she made to close the book. "Oh, just doodling." "It's not a doodle," he said, sitting on the far end of the bench without asking, giving her space. "You've captured the character of it, the way it's twisted but still standing. It's seen storms." The observation was so direct, so devoid of flirtation or pity, that it disarmed her. They talked about trees, then about the land, then about how places hold memory. He revealed he was a retired geologist. "I spent a life reading the stories in rocks, layers of pressure, time, cataclysm, and stillness, all visible if you know how to look." Then he turned his gaze from the oak to her, his eyes kind but analytical. "You're strong, Cindy. You've been through a lot. But strength isn't just about surviving heartbreak. It's choosing yourself when things get messy." He paused. "Geology teaches you that. The most beautiful formations, canyons, diamonds, arches, aren't made by gentle accumulation. They're made by immense pressure, by breaking, by erosion, and by the stubborn decision to remain transformed afterward. You're in the transformation part." His words didn't feel like a line. They felt like a diagnosis from a wise, quiet doctor. He saw not the heartbroken contestant, but the geologic process of a human spirit under pressure. For the first time since the confession, Cindy felt seen, not as an object of drama, but as a subject of her own profound change. The ripple effects and a public reckoning. Mel's world, in contrast, was imploding. His attempted honesty had backfired, painting him as indecisive and unfair to both Cindy and, as it trickled out, to Elena, whom he had now dragged into the public eye. The producers, sensing the goldmine of conflict, orchestrated a group dinner that became a de facto tribunal. One by one, contestants confronted him, their questions laced with accusation masked as concern. "How can we trust your intentions? Did you ever really come here for us?" The atmosphere was thick with judgment. Cindy watched from the end of the table, a silent spectator. She felt no schadenfreude, only a distant pity. She had vacated that emotional battlefield. Its explosions no longer could touch her. It culminated in Mel standing, his face drawn, to offer a public apology. It was directed at the group, but his eyes kept flicking to Cindy, the undeniable source of his greatest remorse. "I came here with an open heart," he said, voice cracking, "but I was naive. I thought the past was a closed book. I was wrong. In trying to be honest, I've caused incredible pain to someone who deserved nothing but respect and clarity." He looked directly at Cindy. "Cindy, I am so sorry. I admired you. I admire you more than I can say. My confusion was not a reflection of your worth. You are exceptional. I failed you, and I have to live with that." The room was silent. All eyes turned to Cindy. This was the moment television craved, the tearful acceptance, the ambiguous hug, the door left ajar for redemption. Cindy took a sip of water, set the glass down carefully. She stood, not with drama, but with a simple, weary grace. She walked over to Mel, not to embrace him, but to stand before him as an equal. "Mel," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the dead quiet, "I heard your apology, and I accept it. Not for you, but for me. Carrying around bitterness is a heavy weight." I allowed a small, compassionate smile. "I understand that hearts are complicated. They aren't ledger books. Yours was pulled in a direction you didn't expect. I believe you didn't mean to cause harm." She took a half step back, creating a definitive space between them. "But understanding isn't the same as returning. My path has diverged. Your honesty, as painful as it was, gave me the greatest gift, the absolute certainty of what I do not want. I cannot be with a man who is learning to be sure. I need a man who already is. So I thank you for your part in my story. But this chapter, the one with you and me in it, is closed. I am writing a new one now." It was a masterpiece of closure, graceful, forgiving, but impenetrably final. She had taken his public apology and used it as the foundation stone for her own public declaration of independence. The new chapter, not a romance, but a reclamation. What developed with Jordan was categorically different from anything on the show thus far. There were no rose ceremonies for it, no orchestrated dates with helicopter rides. It was a series of small, stolen moments that felt more real than any fantasy suite. They met for early morning coffee, talking not about past relationships or future dreams, but about the migration patterns of birds they could see from the terrace, or the flawed philosophy behind a garden maze. He showed her how to read the vineyard's irrigation system, explaining the hydrology of the valley. She told him about the community garden she'd started back home, the petty politics of the Rose Committee. They laughed, deep, unself-conscious laughs that came from shared humor, not performative flirting. One afternoon, they volunteered together at a local animal shelter, a non-televised side trip they requested. There, away from all cameras, Cindy sat in a run with a nervous, elderly terrier mix. She didn't coax it, she just sat, reading a book, letting the dog approach on its own time. Jordan watched from the doorway, leaning against the frame. He saw not a Golden Bachelor contestant, but a woman of immense patience and quiet warmth. The connection that sparked between them was not the dizzying, insecure spark of instant romance, but the slow, reliable glow of two coals being nudged together, each capable of burning brightly on their own, but creating more warmth in proximity. The final group event was a vineyard festival. Music played, couples mingled, and Mel moved through the crowd like a ghost, his story now a cautionary tale woven into the season's fabric. When he approached Cindy one last time, a look of poignant regret on his face, the show's cameras zoomed in tight. "Cindy, can we just talk?" he asked, the noise of the party fading into a hushed anticipation. This was her ultimate unscripted moment. She looked at him, then past him, to where Jordan was chatting amiably with a vineyard worker, completely unconcerned with capturing her attention. She looked back at Mel, and her expression was one of profound, settled peace. She gently raised her hand, a soft but unbreachable barrier. "This isn't about you anymore, Mel. It's about me." Her voice was a calm center in the whirlwind. "I've loved, I've learned, and I've grown. I'm leaving the drama behind." She didn't walk toward Jordan in a dramatic climax. She simply turned and walked into the party, a woman alone in a crowd, utterly complete.
Jordan, noticing she was free, eventually made his way to her side. He handed her a glass of local sparkling water, not champagne. "The music's not bad," he said. "No," she smiled, looking at the horizon where the sun was beginning its descent. "It's not." The final shot was the producer's dream, but it was real. Cindy and Jordan stood side by side at the top of the hill, not holding hands, not kissing. They were simply two silhouettes against a blazing golden sky, facing the vast, open future. The wind played with Cindy's silver-streaked hair. The serene smile on her face wasn't for a man or for the cameras. It was for herself. It was the smile of a woman who had passed through fire and found not ashes, but a stronger, more refined version of herself. The love story the audience witnessed wasn't between a woman and a bachelor. It was the love story of a woman falling back in love with her own life, her own strength, her own possibilities. And in the end, that proved to be the most golden prize of all.
The anatomy of a shattering. The silence after Mel's confession was not empty. It was dense, a tangible substance that filled Cindy's lungs and made breathing an act of conscious will. The laughter from the distant patio, which moments before had been a backdrop of romantic potential, now felt like a cruel, distant echo from a life she was suddenly shut out of. The paper of his letter felt alarmingly fragile in her hands, a stark contrast to the weight of the words it held. She didn't scream, didn't rail. The shock was too complete, a clean, surgical severing of the narrative she'd been living. Walking away from the vineyard gate, every step was a study in control. The cameras, she knew, were capturing her retreating form, the slumped shoulders, the hand hastily brushing a cheek. But inside, a chaotic engine had kicked to life. It wasn't just the pain of rejection, though that was a hot, sharp needle in her heart. It was the profound disorientation of epistemological collapse. Everything she had believed to be true about her connection with Mel, every lingering glance, every private joke, every moment of perceived vulnerability he'd shared was now thrown into a sinister new light. Had it all been a performance? Was she merely a placeholder, a narrative beat in his story of confusion? The feeling of being used, of her genuine emotions being a prop in someone else's indecision, was perhaps more corrosive than the heartbreak itself. Her hotel room that night was a capsule of suspended animation. The tastefully neutral decor, the beige throws, the abstract vineyard painting felt mocking in its serenity. She didn't throw things. She didn't call a friend back home. The rules forbade it, and the isolation of the experience was suddenly, acutely felt. She simply sat on the balcony, as described, but the processing was less a linear thought and more a series of visceral waves. The first wave was humiliation. This was being broadcast to millions. She was the woman who got the "It's not you, it's my unresolved past" speech on national television. The pitying looks from the crew the next day, the whispered conversations among other contestants that would surely follow, it was a social injury layered atop the personal one. The second wave was anger, a clean, hot fury at Mel for his cowardice. Why start this journey? Why accept roses and give hope if his heart was a locked room with someone else's ghost still inside? The anger was a gift. It was energy. It was preferable to the hollow ache of sadness. The third wave, which arrived as the first hint of gray light touched the horizon, was the unexpected one: clarity. It arrived not with a bang, but with a quiet, settling calm. Mel's honesty, however devastating, was a form of respect. A lie, a slow fade leading her further down a garden path to nowhere, that would have been the true cruelty. In his messy, painful way, he had handed her back her agency. He had shown her the trapdoor before she'd built her whole life over it. This realization was the first stitch closing the wound. The decision to text him, to demand a sunrise meeting, was born from this clarity. It was not a plea, it was a reclamation. She was no longer a petitioner for his affection, she was the presiding authority over her own experience, demanding a final report. Sunrise and the unambiguous line. The vineyard at dawn was a different world. The romantic, golden hour glow was replaced by a pale, truthful light that left no shadow unexamined. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and dormant grapes. Cindy stood not in a soft dress, but in simple linen trousers and a sweater, armor of practicality. When Mel approached, he looked exhausted, the weight of his confession and the ensuing night etched on his face. His explanation was more detailed this time, spilled out in the quiet morning. The woman from his past, a college sweetheart, a love lost to career and youthful folly, had reached out after the first episode aired. Old feelings, long compartmentalized, had resurfaced with a terrifying intensity. He spoke of confusion, of being torn between a remembered love and the tangible, wonderful woman in front of him. He used words like unexpected and didn't plan this. Cindy listened. She listened not as a hopeful romantic, but as an analyst of her own fate. And what she heard, beneath the poetic turmoil, was the central, undeniable truth. He was unavailable. His heart was a contested sight. To step into that battle, to try to win against a memory, would be to diminish herself into a competitor. It would mean a relationship founded on comparison, on insecurity, on the hope that he would one day love her version of reality more than his remembered one. When she spoke, her voice was steady, carried on the cool dawn air. "Mel, I thank you for your honesty. Truly, it hurts, but it's better than a beautiful lie." She took a breath, looking not at him, but at the rows of vines stretching into the distance, each one standing alone, yet part of a whole. "But what I hear is that you are not ready. You are not free. And I," she said, finally turning her gaze to him, "I refuse to be an option. I spent too many years in my past life making myself smaller, quieter, more convenient to fit into spaces that weren't built for me. I came here, at this age, for a final, bold chapter, not to be someone's consolation prize or their difficult choice." She drew a line in the dew-kissed gravel with the toe of her shoe, a futile, symbolic gesture, but it felt necessary. "My heart is not a waiting room. It's a home, and it deserves a resident who is all in, whose bags are unpacked, and who isn't glancing out the window at another street." The metaphor was homespun, but it held the weight of a lifetime's learning. "I choose myself, Mel. I choose the peace of my own company over the chaos of yours." It was empowerment, yes, but not the fiery, dramatic kind. It was the quiet, monumental empowerment of a woman who had finally learned the difference between loneliness, the fear of which had driven so many of her choices, and aloneness, which she now recognized could be a state of profound peace and integrity.